America can build expensive technology. China can build enormous volumes of affordable technology. The drone market puts those two strengths on a collision course, and that collision is becoming harder to ignore. Because the real question isn't whether the United States can build a drone. Of course it can. The harder question is whether American companies can build a drone at anything close to the price that Chinese manufacturing has made possible, while also dealing with security concerns, supply chain dependence, regulation, and the enormous scale of the Chinese production system. That is where this story gets uncomfortable. A $200 drone may look like a simple consumer gadget, but if drones become cheap enough, good enough, and common enough, they can change the economics of an entire industry. And suddenly, the argument isn't just about drones, it's about who controls the next generation of affordable technology. For years, drones were relatively specialized machines. They required expensive cameras, motors, batteries, flight controllers, communications equipment, and software. The more capable the drone became, the more expensive it could be. Then Chinese manufacturers started pushing the price and performance equation in a different direction. Instead of asking, how much can a drone cost? The market began asking a much more dangerous question. How little can a capable drone cost? That sounds like a small difference. It isn't. Because when a technology falls below a certain price, the customer base changes. A professional photographer might buy one. A construction company might buy one. A farmer might buy one. But at a low enough price, suddenly a student, a small contractor, a real estate agent, a hobbyist, or a tiny business can consider buying one too. And that creates a completely different market. This is the first thing that makes the $200 drone so important. It isn't necessarily replacing a $2,000 drone. It may be creating millions of customers who would never have purchased a $2,000 drone in the first place. That changes the game, but there's a problem for America. The United States has excellent drone companies, advanced aerospace engineering, huge software capabilities, and deep military experience. What it doesn't automatically have is the same manufacturing ecosystem concentrated around the production of small consumer drones. And that distinction matters more than it sounds. Imagine two companies trying to build the same product. One company has to source motors from one supplier, batteries from another, cameras from another, circuit boards from somewhere else, and then ship everything into a separate assembly operation. The other company operates inside an enormous manufacturing cluster where suppliers, engineers, component makers, assembly plants, testing facilities, packaging companies, and logistics providers are already close to one another. Both companies may have talented engineers, but one company is operating inside a system designed for speed and volume. That is the hidden advantage. The drone is only the final product. Behind it is a network. And that network can make the difference between an expensive product and an affordable one. This is also why the simple explanation, China is cheaper because labor is cheaper, misses the bigger story. Modern drones aren't just plastic shells with 4 motors. They contain cameras, processors, sensors, batteries, communication systems, navigation technology, software, and increasingly sophisticated control systems. The advantage comes from being able to produce many of those pieces at scale, improve them quickly, and bring them together inside one tightly connected industrial ecosystem. That creates a feedback loop. More production lowers costs. Lower costs attract more customers. More customers justify even greater production. Greater production gives manufacturers more data, more experience, and more room to improve, and better products attract even more customers. That's how a cheap product can become a strategic problem, not because every individual drone is extraordinary, but because millions of ordinary drones can collectively change the market. And here's where America's dilemma becomes much more complicated. If the cheapest drones are Chinese, American consumers have an obvious reason to want them. Lower prices are good for buyers. Small businesses want affordable equipment. Farmers want affordable tools, construction companies want affordable inspection technology, creators want affordable cameras. Companies don't necessarily care where a product was manufactured if it solves a problem at the right price. But governments have a different calculation. A drone isn't just a camera flying through the air. It can contain communications equipment, sensors, navigation systems, software, and data connections. That means the same technology that creates an enormous consumer opportunity can also create security concerns. And Washington has increasingly treated foreign-made drones as a national security issue. In December 2025, the Federal Communications Commission placed foreign-made drones and critical drone components on its covered list, blocking approval of new models, with the action particularly affecting Chinese manufacturers such as DJI and Autel. Existing previously authorized models were not automatically banned. Then the rules started becoming more complicated. In June 2026, the FCC created a narrow exception for certain low-risk foreign-made toy drones. But the conditions were extremely restrictive, including limits on weight, range, connectivity, sensors, and flight time. And just days ago, China publicly urged the United States to remove tariffs imposed on drones and related components, showing that the issue is no longer just a technology debate. It has become part of the wider trade relationship between the two countries. That creates a strange contradiction. America wants to reduce dependence on Chinese technology. But rebuilding the entire manufacturing chain needed to compete with Chinese prices is not something that happens overnight. You can build a factory. You cannot instantly build the thousands of suppliers, engineers, component makers, logistics networks, skilled workers, and production knowledge surrounding that factory. And this is where the story becomes much bigger than DJI. The real competition isn't simply between one Chinese drone company and one American drone company. It is between industrial systems. That doesn't mean China automatically wins. In fact, the United States has major advantages of its own. American companies remain exceptionally strong in aerospace, software, advanced computing, defense technology, research, and high-end engineering. The United States can build sophisticated systems, but affordable mass-market hardware creates a different challenge. The question becomes, can America produce sophisticated technology at enormous scale and at prices ordinary customers can actually afford? That's a much harder problem, and there is another twist. The $200 drone may not even be the most dangerous product. The real threat could be what cheap drones allow other businesses to do. Think about a small construction company. If aerial inspection once required expensive equipment, specialized operators, or outside contractors, the economics limited who could use it. But if capable aerial tools become cheap enough, the calculation changes. A company doesn't need to ask whether the technology is worth thousands of dollars. It can ask whether the technology is worth a few hundred. That difference can unlock entirely new uses. Agriculture, roof inspection, mapping, photography, infrastructure checks, small-scale surveying, search operations, delivery experiments, entertainment. The list keeps expanding as the technology becomes cheaper, and this creates the second major threat to established businesses. They aren't only competing against cheaper products. They're competing against customers discovering that they can do things they couldn't previously afford to do. That's a much deeper form of disruption. Because when a market expands, the old leaders may not lose customers immediately. Instead, they can lose control over the definition of the product. Yesterday, the question might have been, which professional drone should I buy? Tomorrow it could be, why wouldn't I own one? That is the psychological shift companies fear. And it has happened before. Computers became cheaper, cameras became cheaper, GPS became cheaper. Smartphones put capabilities into ordinary people's hands that once required specialized equipment. The pattern is remarkably consistent. First, technology is expensive, then it becomes accessible, then people discover new uses, then those uses create new businesses. And eventually, the technology becomes so ordinary that people forget how expensive and specialized it once was. The drone market could be moving through that same process, but now we reach the uncomfortable part. If America responds by restricting Chinese drones, that may protect domestic manufacturers from some competition. It may also create breathing room for American companies to build alternatives. But protection alone does not solve the manufacturing problem. If an American drone costs significantly more, consumers and businesses still have to decide whether the extra cost is justified. And that puts domestic manufacturers in a difficult position. They aren't only being asked to build a good drone, they're being asked to build a good drone while competing against an ecosystem optimized for volume. That's a completely different challenge. The solution may not be simply make it in America. It could require something much bigger: domestic suppliers, battery production, electronics manufacturing, software, skilled workers, automated factories, investment, and enough demand to push those industries towards scale. In other words, America may need to rebuild an ecosystem, not simply assemble a product, and that is expensive. But there is an even bigger question hiding underneath all of this. What happens if the world splits into two drone ecosystems, one built around China's manufacturing scale, another built around American security requirements and domestic supply chains? You could end up with different standards, different software, different components, different markets, and different rules. Europe and other countries would then have to decide which system they want to rely on. Businesses would face their own calculations. Do they choose the cheapest technology, the safest technology, the most advanced technology, or the technology least likely to become trapped by future trade restrictions? Suddenly, the drone isn't just flying through the sky, it is sitting directly inside the battle over global supply chains, and that's why the $200 price matters so much. At first glance, it looks like a consumer story. Then it becomes a manufacturing story, then a business story, then a China-America story, and eventually a geopolitical story, but the biggest lesson may be even simpler. The United States doesn't necessarily face a threat because China can make one cheap drone. It faces pressure because China has demonstrated how powerful it can be when manufacturing scale, component supply, engineering, consumer demand, and global distribution reinforce each other. That is much harder to compete with. And it forces America into a genuine dilemma. If it opens the market completely, consumers may benefit from lower prices, but strategic dependence can grow. If it closes the market, domestic companies gain protection, but consumers may face higher costs, and American manufacturers still have to prove they can match the underlying economics. There is no easy answer. And perhaps that's the most important point. This isn't a story about one country destroying another country's drone industry. It's a story about what happens when the economics of technology change faster than the institutions built around them. The $200 drone is powerful because it crosses a psychological line. It tells millions of people that advanced aerial technology might not be something reserved for professionals, governments, or wealthy consumers anymore. It can become ordinary, and once technology becomes ordinary, the industries built around scarcity have a problem, because the future usually doesn't arrive with one giant machine. Sometimes it arrives as a small product with a surprisingly small price tag, and if that price keeps falling while capability keeps rising, the biggest question won't be whether America can build a drone. It will be whether America can build the entire economic system required to make advanced technology affordable at scale. Because that's the competition hiding behind the $200 drone, not who can make it fly. Who can make the economics fly? And if that battle is only beginning, then the $200 drone may turn out to be less of an ending for one industry, and more of a warning about what comes next.